Naija newspaper review.
Good morning and welcome to the Naija newspaper review here on City Mirror TV. I am Omonigho and I'll be taking you through the various top stories of the Nigeria's newspapers. And first on our table we have the Nation newspaper, and it says NEC adopt 112 as unified national emergency number. On page 3 of the newspaper, police deploy 1,068 combat states, and you can find the story on page 6 of the Nation newspaper. Supreme Court sends Mark-led ADC, AWC back to High Court. School vacated. Apex Court upholds the KDP Ibadan convention. Now the story says, after days of anxiety, the Supreme Court yesterday decided major political party disputes, voiding the People's Democratic Party (PDP) National Convention held in Ibadan on November 15 and 16, 2025. It also granted partial relief to the David Mark-led executive of the African Democratic Congress (ADC) in its leadership. The story continues in page 2 of the newspaper. Inside, INEC restores Mark orders on Porter. Wike no more fashion in PDP. No complacing, says Atiku. See analyst on page 6. On page 6. Tinubu picks Tigbe Babalola for power sector, and that's on page 4. INEC fixed June 20 for by-election in 6 states. 11 discos to refund 55.4 billion metering loan. Shutdown of Egbin plans to worsen outage, story on page 8 of the Nation newspaper. Federal government okay 7 trillion naira for road bridge order projects. Fumbara Ize Yamu orders big form collection extended. Yuguda joins Gombe's governorship race to sustain Yahaya's legacy. And now to the Punch newspaper. May Day. Nigeria Labour Congress TUC lament rising insecurity, poverty, and the stories on page 8 of the Punch newspaper. Airline struggles as losses hit 150 billion naira in 2 months. And the May's story on the front page, leading story on the front page says Mark-led ADC survives as Supreme Court voids Ibadan PDP convention. PDP throws into fresh uncertainty as camps clash over verdicts. ADC celebrates Lifeline, renews pressure to remove INEC laws. Why one celebrates, the other are not. And now to the Daily Trust. 150 persons died in Kwara camp, Amnesty International. 2027, Yuguda joins Gobe governor race. Vows to sustain Inua's Yahaya's legacy, backs Tinubu's renewed hope. Story on page 14 and 27 of the Daily Trust. Benga Hashim asks Tinubu INEC to respect electoral acts, allow primaries to hold in September. Workers' Day. How much work is being done? PDP bold assumes leadership after Supreme Court ruling. 2027, Remi Tinubu visits Kanu, Borno, Kaduna in 1 week. Siblings buried alive as evacuation sites collapses in Sokoto, story in page 6 of the Daily Trust. And the leading story, Supreme Court clears path for ADC. And now to this day newspaper. Finally, NNPC complete 130 kilometers OB gas pipeline. It will boost gas supply, support power generation, says ECO. Ojulari, projects will accelerate Nigeria's 12 BSc F-Day target by 2030. FEC okays $2.99 billion light rail project for Lagos, Kaduna, Kano to boost economy, story on page 5. Oil price hits $126 per barrel, highest since 2022 as Trump mulls fresh Iran option. David Mark-led ADC gets a lifeline at Supreme Court, PDP falls. Majority void PDP Badan, convention over disobedience of courts. Minority insists its internal affairs outside courts intervention. INEC restores mark orders on websites. ADC welcomes judgment, reiterates calls for Amiputan's registration. Resignation. PDP, judgment on leadership crisis, a dangerous bend. Wambara says he's assumed party leadership. Wike, verdict has ended Turaki fashion. Article is a political liability. That's it from the This Day newspaper. And now to the Leadership newspaper. Marco Silva confirms Alex Iwobi will miss Arsenal clash. Story on page 45. A manifesto for presidential aspirants. Supreme Court throw Mark-led ADC a lifeline voice status quo's order. Tinubu nominates Tegbe as power minister. Tigbe. NISCO activates rationing as egg shut down hits national power supply. Story on page 27. Our position about Chi State, addressing 28 years of one zone dominance. 2027, Nigeria women rally behind Tinubu. OPE signs MOUs with 4 more schools, expand access to 1.2 billion 10-year scholarship program on page 21. Security agency intensifies search for 9 abducted Kaduna school children, and the story is on page 36. And now to the Nigeria Tribune. Ampote backs Hamzat as Lagos APC candidates. Bridge leaking quarrel, Oyo collapses, and that's on page 30. Tinubu nominates Tigbe as Minister of Power, appoints Babalola as Special Advisor on Power. UBA pushes deeper bank fintechs collaboration at Pan-Africa Congress. Story on page 16. Rethink Labour Welfare Strategy, CPPE urges government. Women mega rally signal movement for participation to power, says Minister. Ekiti workers stage thank you walk for Ibanji's second term. I shall respond to distraction on June 13th, says Governor, on page 4. Why ADC, Accord, ZLP, AA, APP should be deregistered as AGF terrorist courts, and the story is on page 18 of the Nigeria Tribune. NNPC completes $700 million OB3 gas pipelines, River Naija crossing, on page 6. And the major story is still talking about the South Court nullifies PP Badan Convention, voice status quo's antebellum order on ADC. And now to the Vanguard newspaper. LCCI tax federal government on weak budgets, execution delays in fund release. Lagos 2027, 120 APC leaders sign Hazard's governorship nomination form. Story on page 14. Tinubu mandates Gbaja Biamila Masari to supervise APC NAS primaries. Also, the major story says Supreme Court okays ADC mark asks PDP's Turaki. Remi Tinubu rose at 1.2 billion 100 trucks of rice for vulnerable northern family, and that story is on page 38 of the Vanguard newspaper. Workers mark May Day in pains as labor decries insecurity, poverty, inflation. Story on page 7 of the Vanguard newspaper. Obi to Tinubu. Borrowing for consumption is killer cancer. Now to the Guardian newspaper. INEC affirm exclusive rights to declare pool results as CSO deployed hacker. News story in page 3. FEC approved $2.9 billion rail project for Lagos, Kano, Kaduna. Respect Electoral Acts. Shift primaries to September. Hashim tells Tinubu, INEC. Clarity on sensitivity as Supreme Court reshape opposition ahead of 2027. Story in page 6 of the Guardian newspaper. SSA and NASU embark on indefinite strike today. Boko Haram threatens to execute 416 captives. The news story is on page 4. Worsened cost of living crisis overshadows May Day despite wages increases. Story in page 6. Federal government begin 18-month database modernization ahead of census. Naija LGs record 2 polio cases as Katsina declares gap in vaccination. FG resolve MM2 concession disputes, approve aircraft leasing firm. And that's the news from the Guardian newspaper. And now we'll be taking a few headlines from the Western Post Nigeria. And it says AKT workers pledge 500,000 votes for Oyibaji's re-election. Man absconded after allegedly killing wife in Ondo community. The Price of Silence, personal reflection on power and responsibility by Babafemi Ojudu. ADC convection. Wike did not threaten us, the Rainbow Event Center clarifies. And that's all we can take from the Daily Post Nigeria and from the newspapers in Nigeria. And that's the end of today's edition of the program. I am Omonigho and I say thank you for watching.